For those of you that don't know me, my name is Donn Morrill. I'm the founder and chairman of the New York Technology Council. We started the council 5 years ago now, and have come a long way since then. Eric Grillman, who is our CEO, is sitting in the front row. In my day job, I happen to work for Amazon Web Services, so I help out with the cloud event series here at NYTECH when I get a chance. It's kind of hard to stay agnostic, but we try and do a good job of presenting a well-rounded panel and a well-rounded debate. So hopefully some of that shines through in the event tonight. Real quick about NYTECH, New York Technology Council. Again, we've been around for about 5 years. We are a nonprofit industry association dedicated to making New York a center of excellence for technology and helping technology companies grow and thrive in the New York area. We are part of a consortium of regional technology councils across North America, so we work very closely with some of our sister organizations in New Jersey and Connecticut and really across the Americas to help foster technology and innovation in our respective areas. Our primary activities include education, such as the event you're attending tonight. We provide educational seminars and events for our members. We do a lot of community building, so whenever we poll our membership, the first thing that we hear from them is more networking, right? So we do holiday parties throughout the year. We do networking before and after the events, and we really try and build a community around technology in New York. We do workforce development. So one of the biggest concerns that we hear from our membership companies is we can't find enough talent. There's not enough tech talent in New York. Can you help us? And so one of the things that we focus on is developing tech talent within New York. We work with organizations like Scholastic, which provides free IT and MIS training for underprivileged people in New York, and we help them both with curriculum development. We provide special guest speakers to their programs, and we help them with job placement once they've graduated from that program. And then we do advocacy as well. We work both at the local level and at the federal level to represent the interests of technology companies back into our government and to our representatives. We do several excursions a year down to Washington, D.C., where we talk about technology policy and the things that impact technology companies and have those discussions with our representatives. We do about 40 or so events per year. Again, most of them tend to be educational and networking. We also have a CEO roundtable that we run for small and mid-sized companies. We have a peer group of CEOs that get together once a month and talk about issues that are of specific concerns to CEOs running technology companies in New York. Of course, annual memberships and sponsorships are available. So for those of you that are not yet members or sponsors, please consider membership or sponsorship of the organization. It's through your participation in the organization that we grow. We can't do it without our sponsors, and we can't do it without our members. So anybody that's not, please consider joining the organization. I won't go through the entire list. I think this is alphabetical, but I want to recognize some of the sponsors that we've had over the year. Companies like Google and IBM and Amazon and Anshin. And the list goes on and on. Real quick, some of the upcoming events that we have, I want to talk about them very quickly. On March 24th, we're going to be doing part of our legal series. We're going to do legal essentials for startups. So what does it take to, from a legal perspective, how do you get started as a startup company? You know, a lot of companies, when they first start up, are thinking about technology, thinking about product, thinking about that cool idea. But there's a lot of stuff that you have to get right as a startup, especially as you start to grow and grow. And you know, at the tail end of that series, we do an event on preparing your company for acquisition. So we really want to take a startup company through the entire life cycle from a legal perspective. What are the things you have to do to get started? And what are the things you have to think about to scale that organization and to eventually get involved in some type of exit? We're also going to talk specifically about angel investing on March 31st. That's always a popular topic. Talking about fundraising for startups. And then this is one that's near and dear to my heart. Every year we've been, since this event was launched, there's been this event called the International Space Apps Challenge, which is it's a hackathon. It's oriented like a hackathon, so it's a 2-day weekend event sponsored in part by NASA, but it's the It's the biggest and probably the first global hackathon where we have participation from, I want to say, about 70 cities around the world are giving a series of challenges, and simultaneously they're all working on very similar problems. And for the past 2 years, I'm proud to say that New York has been the flagship city for the event. NASA sends an astronaut down, the CIO of NASA was here last year, and so this event gets bigger and more interesting every year. So if anybody has an interest in hackathons or space technology or even Earth technology, this is a really interesting one to get involved in. I'd also like to give a special thanks tonight to EisnerAmper. They are not only a founding sponsor of NYTECH, but they host many of our events, and we wouldn't be where we are today without EisnerAmper, so I'd like to give them a special thanks for hosting us tonight, but also for being a founding sponsor of NYTECH. And with that, I'm just going to turn it over to Thomas, our moderator for tonight. Everybody should have a bio with the panelists in front of you, so I won't go into too much detail. I'll allow them each to do some opening announcements and remarks, and I'll turn it over to Thomas.
Great, thanks a lot, Donn, and really appreciate the turnout tonight. You're all very brave for coming through the snow, so I'm very excited to see this level of turnout given the weather. Just a quick introduction for myself, Tom Shelford. I'm president of Corsis. We're an IT risk management company located down on 21st Street. We're an Amazon Web Services advanced consulting partner, but we also support clients at a lot of other platforms like Joyent, Rackspace, and Microsoft Cloud. So we're very interested in this topic. And we basically provide our clients with business intelligence tool called the Corsis Confidence Index, which helps give you visibility into whether your infrastructure is meeting best practices. So we're hoping to share a lot of insights around that experience. Great panel tonight, so I want to just let everybody introduce themselves. But first, our topic today, we're going to take kind of a retrospective look at how large enterprises have adopted the cloud, and here's some firsthand lessons learned from our panel who are with these companies that are at the leading edge of cloud adoption. So I'll let everybody go around the table. Maybe let's start with Peter and kind of go down the line here.
Sure. Hi, I'm Peter Rowlinson. I'm the CTO of Hearst Business Media, and Hearst Business Media is part of Hearst Corporation, a private company. And Hearst Business Media operates in about 30 countries today, has about 20 businesses, individual businesses underneath it. We service healthcare, finance, and automotive as our primary sectors. And we create 3 products really, software products, database products, and API products. That's kind of our go-to-market. Today we've done about 50% of our environment. We've moved to the cloud, and our goal is to move the rest over the next couple of years. Thanks.
Hi, my name is Anil Nair. I'm the SVP of Engineering at Lendkey. Lendkey is it's a cloud-based lending platform where we connect credit unions and community banks to the consumers through an online channel. We are in the $1.3 trillion market. We started about 6 years back. We've been predominantly a cloud company. I'll run on Amazon for quite some time. Still do a big chunk on Amazon, but have Rackspace and some of the other competitors to space.
Hi, so I'm Adam Japhet. I'm the Director of Automation and Integration Services for Scholastic. So I'm responsible for DevOps, implementing DevOps as a culture, as well as the cloud implementation programs that we've got, so focused a little bit more on the operations side. We're about 2/3 of our workload migrated to Amazon, of the workload that we had intended to migrate to Amazon, which is primarily in the IaaS and PaaS space. And this supports a variety of business units, such as book clubs, for those of you who either grew up in the US or have kids that go to school here. This is the flyers that arrive at your home. Please buy lots of stuff. The book fairs, the same thing, the fairs that we have, which also helps to promote usually within the school system, with your parent-teacher organization, so please go to as many fairs as you can, as well as some of our more focused products like Read 180, Math 180 focus for educational technology, and a variety of other business units that we've got.
Great, thanks everybody. So I'd like to get to know our audience a little better before we start our conversation. So let's do a quick audience poll, show of hands. How many of you are working at companies that are currently contemplating a significant cloud migration right now? Do you want to raise your hand? Okay. And how many are currently underway or have completed a pretty significant cloud migration at their firms? Okay. And good. All right. So that gives us a little context into what we're looking at here. So where I'd like to begin is just getting a sense of the state of play at each of your companies. And I want to ask our panelists briefly, what is the state of cloud adoption at your company currently? So for example, maybe you got your toe in the water with disaster recovery and now you're migrating some of your production environments over. So just give us a sense of kind of where the company stands right now. Let's start with Peter.
Sure. Our company started with our products first. We looked at our products and decided that would be a good place to start. We have a second part of our organization, which is our enterprise environment, and that right now is undergoing a pretty major shift to the cloud. The strategy really started in 2010. We looked across our company and we looked across our applications, and we did an assessment and determined that we could put a good percentage of our applications in a cloud environment. We also recognized that some of the environments would need to stay in colo or managed services, and then a small percentage would need to stay in-house in our own data centers. So with that strategy, we really mapped out over the last 5-6 years a movement starting with our products, and today we've got about 50% of our products hosted at a cloud provider. Today it's Amazon. We had started with another cloud provider but have since moved off of them. And our plan is to continue that migration. I don't know that we'll get to 100%, but I think we'll certainly get to 75 or 80% in the near term. We do have a fair amount of HIPAA data as part of our some of our products, and that requires us to go through some extra steps of security to protect that privileged patient information.
So when we were a startup for about 5 years back. That's when we started our infrastructure process. We started it as a managed services. Over a period of time, we found out scaling was not that easy. We moved into especially when we started our big marketing campaigns, we realized that our infrastructure was not scaling as fast as the traffic load was coming in. So we moved into the Amazon cloud and created an entire front end based on the cloud system. Over the past year and a half, we started moving our DR center into the Rackspace cloud, providing the redundant services from a different provider. We probably would end up by the end of this year a combination of co-located, some of our data, managed services, and about 70% of our infrastructure in a combination of Amazon and Rackspace out there.
So I'd say from a maturity standpoint, I give ourselves about a 3 out of 5. I think we're relatively mature at this point. So similar to them, we started a transformation initiative several years ago, but the transformation initiative really encompassed more than just a migration to cloud. Migration to cloud became one of the targeted architecture outcomes of this, but there were also several other architecture and business outcomes. So I think for us, the journey has been making sure we choose the right workloads for the cloud. So we started in with everything that essentially is running on compute that can be moved to x86 platform. Can we move it? Should we move it to AWS? And very quickly we found certain workloads, such as, for example, for a long time we hosted our own Microsoft Exchange for collaboration. Right, that was a much better fit for moving to Office 365 and have that be managed by Microsoft. We had our ERP systems, and we found that it was a better fit to get it out of hosting in our own data center and move that to colo or managed service provider. But generally we found, especially for our customer-facing properties, the digital space, e-commerce space, even a fair amount of our back office workload, certainly in analytics, it's all been a very good fit for AWS.
Sounds like the starting point has been with customer-facing applications, but I'd like to dig in a little further on the business drivers behind that. So we kind of mentioned some of the mechanics of what gear has been moved in and out, what's been moved over. But maybe let's start back with Adam. What were some of the business drivers? Was it cost reduction? Was it spiky capacity that you had to support? What were some of the drivers there?
So several of our workloads are fairly cyclical. For some of our business units, book clubs, for example, was really driven around a time period that we refer to as back to school, which is essentially what it means. It's an August, September time frame when schools come back in sessions. And then also around the holidays. So we found that the workload would really spike very high during that period of time, and then for some lines of business, when the school is closed in the summer, the workload completely changes. We could be not having to deal with customer facing for some of our e-commerce applications where we're doing things like summer reading challenge. So it became tremendously challenging to manage a capital budget over a year with such a diverse workload. So that was really one of the first benefits that I sold my management team on the cloud, was being able to smooth out that CapEx spend and really have, in this case, we chose to go with Amazon. Really, they take the brunt of the CapEx spend, and we work with them to essentially make use of their compute that they've invested in, which is really kind of how Amazon Web Services started to begin with, was pretty much scaled to with the scale it is at today. So really being able to smooth out those rough edges so that we can serve all of our internal customers and give them the compute power that they need at the time that they need it to manage their business cycle, and not have to deal with all the issues you have to deal with in a shared data center. That was the key genesis to kick off the cloud migration.
So Adam, it sounds like the seasonality of your business had a big factor in that, which is kind of interesting because, as you mentioned, that goes back to the origin of the way Amazon approached it. Hey, we've got this massive e-commerce platform. It's idle in the off season. What do we do about that?
Yeah,
so that's very interesting. So how about Anil? Can you talk to some of the business drivers that pushed you guys?
Sure. I mean, we have a very similar kind of seasonality model. We started our business in student loan origination. Student loans spike between June and ends around September-ish. So we had the summer months, summer, early fall, we had a huge spike in volume, and during the rest of the year, it's literally dead. So we created them. So initially, when we were doing the managed services, we had huge amounts of infrastructure which we bought in just to manage the spike, and rest of the year there was nothing happening on this service. You could actually see the capacity like literally drop to less than 50% of what we were planning for our business. So that's when we decided that the cloud's probably a better option for us. We moved into the Amazon space, built our infrastructure out there. So that allowed us to give us that elasticity where we could dial up as capacity as we need as during the summer seasons, but then dial down the capacity during off season. One of the other advantages that we have found out was we started doing a decent amount of work in big data, and the amount of processing that we could do internally, the cloud could do it 100 times faster than we could do it, and the capacity was huge. So we started leveraging a lot more on that side too. So both our origination side as well as data processing, we migrated all of that into the cloud. Whereas the internal, since we do a lot of AI-related stuff, all of that data still remains within our management system.
So it sounds like the data processing capacity was a really attractive, powerful feature for you guys. And then I guess the seasonality for Lendkey is around student loans. Is that correct? All right, so Peter, I'll pass the mic to you and hear some of the business drivers that came out of Hearst.
I think for Hearst Business Media, it was primarily around speed. We were looking to create environments and create products in those environments at a fast rate, and we just found we weren't able to do that in some of the traditional environments, hosted environments, solo or managed services. So we started the strategy really looking at how quickly should we get our products to market and support them in those environments. What's happened, I think, since then, though, is we've looked across our application suite, and we've kind of realized that the majority of our internal applications, and we're a media company, so content management systems are part of our world, they needed to stay close to the employees, and we had a hard time breaking them and moving them apart. They had to kind of go together, so the desktops and the servers had to stay together. So that's kind of the challenge we're facing right now with our back office environments. So I think speed has been our primary driver.
Great, thanks. I'd like to pivot the conversation a bit to issues and challenges. One of the big barriers to cloud adoption for large enterprises historically has been security concerns and considerations. So now that we have the benefit of hindsight, where large enterprises have been moving to the cloud, were CTOs justified in that suspicion, in that skepticism, and what's changed to get people over the hump? So anybody want to take that first?
Yeah, I think we looked at it also as a concern, I think like everybody did. But one of the things we realized is that we were able to do the same things in a cloud environment that we were able to do in a colo. We really didn't see very much at all. All the major players that were in traditional enterprise space or traditional colo space were providing products in the cloud. So it was easy for us. And also the time that we could implement some of those security features or products was very small, very short amount of time. For us to deploy an environment, to put in intrusion detection and firewall, we could do that in really minutes, whereas before in a colo or in some other environment, it took months.
So it sounds like there were actually some advantages in that you could more quickly react to environment changes that you had to make, and also quarantine environments that are troublesome or vulnerable. You can simply kind of shut them off and turn on an upgraded version. That seems pretty interesting. So how about Anil? Do you want to comment on the security considerations? Certainly with Lendkey, you guys are handling some pretty sensitive financial data in some cases.
Yeah, definitely. So that was our biggest concern, was that when we moved from managed infrastructure to cloud, like how much of our data can realistically be moved and where does data reside? Some of the challenges we had was we didn't want our data. Some of our data cannot cross state borders. We have different rules about holding different kinds of student data and where can they be resided. So we ended up creating a hybrid solution wherein a lot of our marketing and email and regular mail data that comes into our cloud infrastructure, whereas most of the student information, the financial information still stays within our own managed infrastructure. We had a hybrid version of the whole process.
So Anil, let's talk about that hybrid solution that you came up with. What were some of the challenges to create that segmentation and that differentiation between data sets with different security tiers?
Definitely. So one of our challenges was how to differentiate at which particular point in the application path should it move from the cloud services to our managed side. So we started defining our products on the product path. So we had our product teams walk through the entire path and say at which particular point are we collecting PII information. From that particular point on, we moved it into our own managed infrastructure. We created a separate secure domain and restricted access to that. Whereas everything else, we said that they could be spread out. So that was kind of our major differentiating factor, was at which particular point do I start collecting more information about the student, their SSN, and other information. And we moved all of that into our managed infrastructure.
Did you find that some of the native tools in terms of security group architectures and VPC were ready-made for this solution, or did you have to really innovate?
When we went into cloud, we actually went back right after the services tier and said that we're going to create a stack where in every stack, right from the hardware all the way to that tier, should be able to scale up and down. So we actually created the whole infrastructure in that format. So VPC and those pieces were already built into our hardware tier, so we could easily switch on. We basically used VMware's Fabric product to be able to move things, virtual machines from our box, from our infrastructure, all the way out into the cloud and bring it back inside. So it was a lot easier, a lot more elastic. And being a startup, we didn't have the big DevOps teams that we would love to have. So this helped us a lot. We could maintain a bigger set of servers with a very low head count from an FTP standpoint.
Nice. So let's talk about some of Scholastic's security considerations and challenges and what you had to get through in terms of objections within the organization, perhaps.
Sure. So when we started this migration to, and again, I'm going to be a little bit more focused on AWS because that's really where our journey to the cloud was. At the time, I was also in a slightly different role, and I was a little bit closer to the ground and knowing what our weak points were, and really just sitting in that. I remember sitting in that first training session for Amazon. At the end of that training session, like, they do almost everything better than we do, and why are we running everything in Amazon? So understanding that there were a lot of, it was really the surface area, understanding that moving to the cloud was reducing the surface area that Scholastic had to cover because we were sharing more surface area than we were in the colo with the colo provider. The colo provider is very much providing us a space to put our infrastructure and power and cooling and physical security, but that's about it. We're responsible for all of our own infrastructure. Even if you're moving into more of an MSP model, you're still sharing some of the accountability with them, but looking at the size of Amazon and the infrastructure and their approach to it versus what we needed to do, I felt that actually putting more surface area into the Amazon was getting us better coverage, and the mechanisms with which Scholastic needed to maintain their systems were ones that were essentially the same controls that all customers had. There were no back doors into our infrastructure that another customer could get because Amazon essentially doesn't offer you back doors into your infrastructure. You have to use the same mechanism for maintaining your infrastructure that they do. So really, once I understood the technical aspects of the implementation, I needed to then reformat that into more business terms. And really, for me, being able to explain, look at the size of Amazon, their e-commerce offering, and their digital offering compared to what we are offering, and being able to share that surface area with Amazon, and they fit all the compliances. And I agree, yes, that VPC I think was really the critical feature that came out in 2012 for us, is being able to segment our own network traffic such that we're not going to have our traffic go across the public internet, but instead have essentially a private network within Amazon was really one of the major critical features that was selling point for me to make the decision to go forward with the public cloud.
So for the folks in our audience who are having these internal conversations right now about security considerations, can you shed some light on some of the stakeholders that you had to convince, or where did the resistance come internally, if any?
It didn't have as much resistance on security as I thought it would. More of our resistances were more around, first, somewhat the premise of moving to the public cloud. It wasn't so much isolated to security versus, is it reliable? It was actually a little bit more on the reliability side. I think, and I believe Amazon's done a great job since 2012 to address reliability from a component level all the way down, all the way up to the entire region level. At least I felt that as a customer that they've done a very good job to address availability. So I got a lot more on availability than I did on security. I was able to detail that these are all security compliances that we have. We already had certain parts of our technology stack, so we were already engaging other SaaS vendors. We already had some parts of our pipeline, like Strangeloop and other companies that we were using, that we were already directing a lot of our digital traffic through AWS. Because at that time when AWS had outages, sometimes we would have outages and said, well, wait a minute, we don't have anything running in AWS, but we do have portions of this was again more focused on our digital properties. So realizing at that point that we were already essentially Amazon customers before we were, again, and within our company, I didn't face as much on the security side as I did on the availability side.
For us, I think the biggest challenge was getting our legal team to feel comfortable with the cloud, and that took quite a while. I have to say we're maybe still going through a little bit of that now, but once we got past that point, what was really helpful is to have third-party assessments firms come in and look at the security and then bring that to senior management, and that usually would give them a comfort level. The other thing that's very helpful is if you can bring kind of use cases of other companies that are similar to yours that are doing something already in the cloud, that certainly helps as well. Those are the big three things for us.
So having those independent, objective third-party assessments helped get people over the hump a bit, so it wasn't just an internal ideological debate. You really had some objective third-party validation of the observations. Great. Go ahead, Anil.
No, I agree with Peter. That's exactly what we had to do. Get third-party validation.
Good. So let's talk a little bit about what some of the most common mistakes that are being made out there. Not to air dirty laundry, but even if you observe with your colleagues out there in the marketplace, medium to large size enterprises, what are some of the typical mistakes or pitfalls that folks are falling into?
I would say just for us, starting before we really knew what we were doing was somewhat of a mistake. So I think if you can spend a little time up front educating and training, going through that process, that probably will speed things along.
For us, it was I mean, one of the things which we noticed with a lot of our folks in our business was redundancy. We go into the cloud assuming that the cloud's always available, but that's not always the case. There is a time when a service provider can go down, either if it's in a particular area or across the geography. So not having a redundant backup provider for a different company altogether, not having that hurts a lot of companies. The server outages, when the publish outages, and a lot of sites that hurt. So part of what our plan actually has, as having two providers, we split the traffic between them. One is predominantly our DI provider, and another one is our main service provider. Every quarter, we switch traffic between both of them just to make sure both of the networks are working as we possibly can make it work out.
So capacity on demand doesn't necessarily mean architecture on demand. You still have to architect, and you still have to pay attention to the traditional considerations of redundancy, failover, disaster recovery, etc.
A few things that come to mind for me. First, treating the public cloud as a data center. It's not just another data center. And so some of the practices that we modeled in our first migrations are not the right practices, and we've had to refactor them the way that we segregated out environments and deployment paths. It turns out in hindsight that we actually created constraints now that we're going to have to come back and refactor. And then to the line of availability in the cloud is different. It's not necessarily better or worse depending upon the nature of your applications. There's certainly things that are outside of your control, but you really need to design how you're going to operate your products and services around the public cloud. And the only way you can do it is really internalize the knowledge. You can't. A partner will certainly help you get there, but you have to build the team and the culture and the cadence to make sure that they understand that operating with a public cloud involves things like, again, more in-zone specific, how you split your workloads across availability zones and regions, and how you replicate your persistent data, and immutable infrastructure and automation, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So those were a lot of the lessons that we learned. And then you just have to be willing to take a few chances with things too, with your less prominent properties, with your projects and their initiations, and use those as opportunities to experiment with the new features that Amazon comes out with, as well as refactor perhaps some of the decisions that you made. That is one of the big benefits of the cloud, is that you can test and learn usually much faster than you can in the data center, because you're not dealing with a capital investment, switching from one major provider, hardware infrastructure provider, or software platform to another.
So Adam, Peter mentioned retraining and skill sets as a challenge. Was that a challenge for Scholastic as well, since you guys are a large organization?
Absolutely. So one of the first things that we learned during our migration to the cloud is how much it relied on automation, or how much we chose to make it rely upon automation. So we do have certain workloads that operate in the cloud that would operate similar to how they do in the data center, but then we have workloads that are very different. We have deployments in our more progressive and fast-moving spaces that are fully immutable. They'll do the entire deployment, rip down the infrastructure, and provision it from scratch, and as part of their continuous deployment lifecycle. That's very different from, I want to stand up a Windows server and just have it up and running and back it up every once in a while and hope it doesn't go down. It's two extreme cases there, right? So you do need to make sure that you can build that team internally and give them the knowledge, and then really free them to learn different practices about operating in AWS. And for me, again, my space in DevOps and automation, it was really about employing DevOps as a culture, and automation is the best practice.
And to add to what Adam said, I think as I look back on our cloud journey, I think we started off treating public cloud much like we were our traditional infrastructure. And I don't think that's really was a bad thing. It certainly made our engineers comfortable doing something they were doing before, just in a different environment. But what I've seen over the last few years is they are now architecting different than the way they started in the cloud. And that's been kind of a journey. With our holdings, we've got roughly 20 companies, so it's kind of a nice thing. You can see the different levels of that journey. They don't all have to go at the same time, but at the end they are moving in the same direction.
So Anil, it sounds like you had sort of the opposite problem in the sense that these guys had large organizations. They had to retrain teams and get them to change their culture, their approach to automation. In your case, we wish we had the DevOps guys. You had sort of lean resources. So what were some of the challenges there? Did you have to get people to learn new skills, or how did you import that talent?
So yeah, for us, it was every developer knew how to run their application on the cloud. And that was what we ended up being for quite some time. We never had a DevOps team or an infrastructure team, or we just had a group of developers. So they would build code, they would deploy it, things would fail, and everybody would be sitting, burning to midnight oil, trying to figure out like what broke, what did it do. I could have done it very easily in the managed services. Why can't I do it in the cloud? To us building our own best practices, like what is the right way to deploy stuff in the cloud. We run a Ruby on Rails infrastructure on one side of our organization and the Visual Basic infrastructure on the other side of our organization. So two completely very distinct and non-portable pieces of the technologies. So trying to make sure that we create the best practices. And a lot of it, especially during our initial growth stages, was us learning it. I mean, we going into the Amazon system, we going into Rackspace system and figuring it out, like how to do this stuff. Now we reach a point where we actually, okay, now we know what we need to do, and if things break down, we know how to quickly get it back up, or get normalized through the process. And as we become more mature in the cloud scenarios, actually building up DevOps teams, very specifically looking for people who actually know how to deal with deployments and automation in the cloud and not in the infrastructure world.
So cross-training and the cross-training experience that you mentioned is a mantra of the DevOps philosophy, but clearly change control is the other side of that coin that really needs to happen in order to, once you enable everybody to make changes to your environment, they start feeling maybe a little too comfortable with that. You really got to upgrade your change control processes at the same time.
Definitely, and also creating silos so that developers have access to a QA environment, or the senior devs have access to the production environment, being able to move code from one tier to another tier. A lot of those things we were learning on the fly. I mean, even though conceptually we knew how to do it, we didn't have the staffing or the number of people to actually go ahead and do that stuff. So we were doing a lot of this on the fly. We started with like everybody having access to the 10 servers that was out in the cloud, and it became 150 servers. So like, yeah, probably not the best idea. So had to strike it back, start building it, build out processes, create. Now finally we are reaching a point where there's a proper dev, QA, staging in the production release process.
Yeah, so I'll ask Peter, when the traditional provisioning checks and balances are no longer there, how do you step up your game in terms of those processes around change control, deployment specialization, skill sets, etc.?
Yeah, I think using tools like Chef helps. If you use an automation tool to provision equipment or to provision servers, then that plays into part of your change management. Anytime you make a change, it gets recorded in your Chef recipe, for example, and that kind of feeds into it. The other thing I think helped with us is standardizing on our source code repositories, making sure that those are centralized, and putting runbooks right into the source code repository so that everyone knew where those things are. So those were some of the things we did around change management.
I'm going to shift a little bit to infrastructure cost savings. So that's one of the allures of cloud adoption. And so I'd like to hear from the panel, what cost saving strategies have you used, what's been effective, and what's been a disappointment or an expectation that you feel was excessive around infrastructure cost savings? That's a common theme that we hear. You go into it with a certain expectation of the cost savings you're going to get from this migration, and the reality hits. So I'd like to hear your personal stories around what that reality looked like. I'll start with Adam.
So from a cost savings standpoint, we've certainly realized the cost savings on what it takes to bootstrap a project, to bootstrap a new initiative. A lot of it was also soft costs. costs, just the amount of time that we would have to spend on solution architecture is significantly reduced. But one of the other benefits I've found is, well, again, more specific to Amazon, but it would actually be relevant for other cloud providers if it's OpenStack or Azure, is you find you can speak a common language with multiple teams, which was much more difficult prior to the public cloud. So you'll deal with the QA engineering discipline, software development, solution architecture discipline, and when you tell them that you're running in Amazon and you're making use of these features and functions, you immediately speak the same language. Then, well, we've got a NetApp array, but we've also got 2 EMC arrays, and we've got Cisco, but we also have Juniper, and trying to cobble together the variety of infrastructure. So certainly on the bootstrap side and the run state, I see in terms of a disappointment, I guess I'll look at you when I say this, in terms of a disappointment, I think one of the challenges we've had is really trying to find that right time to make the reserved instance commit, because so much of being able to normalize your costs is around the reserved instance. And the big challenge is when you're dealing with auto scale workload, but also just the changing types of workloads. And then you have the T2 micros, you have the T2 medium, you have the M3s, you come up with different chipsets. And it's just one of the many functions that my teams have to perform. That's been the challenge, is trying to and we've been working with Amazon on this, but just trying to get that commitment, because we want to make sure you're making the right commitment to the right workload. But when you're dealing with very cyclical or seasonal business units, or you're dealing with an application development paradigm that's involving completely immutable infrastructure gets redeployed upon every major release, trying to normalize those baseline costs is difficult, but the way that most of the public cloud works is not so.
But in terms of your overall personal experience, do you find did you find that your expectations were exceeded in terms of the cost savings that you were going to realize, or was it a disappointment?
I'd say they were met. I think we tried to be fairly realistic. There's always having to go through and clean up the junk. We're going to probably get a little bit more aggressive about that in terms of having automated processes to go out there. We rely very heavily on tagging of our infrastructure. But really everything that we deploy in the public cloud is tagging, is really able to, our enablement to tie back to a project and asset to the creator of that. So I'm very big on accountability right now in the public cloud, because I think once you make people accountable to what they're spending on their project, and recognizing you have to spend money to experiment, to try different things, to move speedily, but making people recognize what the cost of their decisions were. A lot of that was really isolated from the development community for a long time. The public cloud really makes that exposed. I imagine you probably see a lot of that in a startup, that you really were very exposed to that cost.
Yeah, I would just add a couple of things to echo what you said about stall costs. We did see a significant savings of engineering time as a result. We also saw a little bit of a higher quality. Just if you think about the ability to create a QA environment quickly, do your testing and shut it down when it's finished. We really couldn't do that before the cloud as quickly as we could now. So I think it has had a positive impact on the quality of our products. The other thing is we were able to pull the plug on things, I think, a little bit quicker. Maybe it's an innovation project that we have that we're working on and decide it's not going anywhere. Pull the plug on that is, we think about how much money we're saving by being able to get out of that technology investment quicker. I think it's certainly a big thing there.
For us, it's been predominantly, since we started as a cloud, we didn't really have, or it has always been beneficial for us. Right now, it's more of managing our business expectations. Business comes to us and say, you guys are the cloud, why don't you blast new project at this particular point, and trying to make them understand that that's not how we launch a project. It requires the product to have much more than just deploying an application into the cloud. There has to be a broader break. So that's one of our bigger challenges, hopefully. From an infrastructure maintenance standpoint, to what you mentioned, we were able to set up an entire QA environment in less than a day and a half, everything from the database all the way up. So great in terms of quality. One of the challenges always, which worries me a lot, is generally where my virtual machine is hosted. Is it shared with somebody else's virtual machine? And if that application has a problem, how do I ensure that it does not affect me? that's generally my biggest concern in most of the public clouds. We try to work around it, but we know that that's the part of the cloud where we have redundancy built into stuff and we overspend for the redundancy.
So you have the expectation of failure built into your architecture philosophy.
And one other thing we also do, I don't think we're spending less as a result of moving to the cloud. I actually think we're spending more, but we're doing a tremendous amount more than we've ever done before. It's, I think, much more cost avoidance. If you think about the amount of redundancy we've been able to put in with the cloud that we didn't really have as much prior, I think the savings are there, and we're just doing so much more.
A good example of that, for example, I think is disaster recovery. Combine immutable infrastructure, transcribing everything as code, and then multi-region public cloud, even multi-public cloud. It significantly reduces the investment that you need to make for disaster recovery, because if your expectations of disaster recovery, RTO, less than 24 hours of recovery, and being able to maintain the same SLAs, you're literally looking at replicating the entire production infrastructure. And with the public cloud, you only have to really replicate your persistent data and your base configuration, and then you can make use of, again, if you make heavy use of automation, defining everything as code, and immutable infrastructure, bring that environment up quite rapidly in a disaster recovery scenario that's simply not possible if you're trying to do that by managing it.
Yeah, we could talk about also some surprises on the positive side in terms of benefits that you accrued that you weren't expecting, and it sounds like you guys were starting to touch on some of those. Maybe we'll keep that going.
Yeah, I was just going to say another benefit. I don't think we'd be able to do some of the things we're able to do today. This past year, we were involved in about 3.8 billion transactions around prescriptions, and I don't think we could do that unless we were really in the environments that we're in today. And if you think about the disaster recovery for that type of environment, it would be really complicated to do. So I think the complexity and the speed and cost are all things that we've been able to control as a team.
So, Anil, any surprising benefits that you found?
Okay. Yeah, to the point that I agree with you. There was a huge amount of capacity savings that we get by just not having those boxes always running with big part of society. Something that we have is a huge benefit. Our ability to launch new product lines initially took us anywhere from 18 to 20 months to launch a product line, right from provisioning, getting everything to do that. Right now it takes about a month and a half of total time to launch a product line.
Right, so there's a lot of attention usually around scalability and capacity on demand, but that time to market advantage is something that is not always emphasized, just in terms of the impact it has on your production workflow, the speed of your product development process.
One I mentioned previously, and one new one, the one I mentioned previously is, again, the idea that in public cloud, and AWS certainly applies here, so does OpenStack and Azure, being able to have the same descriptive language really significantly ramp down the solution architecture time when you're able to speak with development and partner teams, vendors, and understand, like, we're operating in AWS, so we want to put the way use of certain workloads, right? You make use of ELB, you make use of S3, so on and so forth. That significantly ramped down the solution architecture time, so we ramped up the innovation time, just being able to get prototypes up and running. And then the other one was really the bane of my existence for the times when running data centers is that shared infrastructure, the infrastructure that is just expensive, that you have to make investments and ultimately cobble together several applications of your core switches, your SANs, your backup systems. And provisioned IOPS was really one of the key features when Amazon released that, I guess several years ago. They've innovated above and beyond that. But being able to segregate workloads for applications such that they're not clobbering each other on shared infrastructure was so critical to really stabilizing the perception of the infrastructure in the public cloud, because that had been a pain point for us for a long time. It only takes one bad app having a bad day on some of your shared infrastructure to make your entire data center look fragile, when really it's just isolated to one specific element.
So being able to quarantine the bad apples is an unexpected benefit.
But yet throw targeted infrastructure at them and not have to one poorly tuned application, you can actually, I feel you can fine tune that in the public cloud much easier than you can in your own data center.
Peter, seeing you on your head at a few points, anything else to add?
No, I definitely think that's our experience as well.
Okay. I'm going to shift gears a little bit to kind of looking ahead to the future, and then we'll have some time to entertain questions from the audience. So if you had a time machine and you could go back, let's say 5 years, what would you tell the cloud providers to do differently? And also, what would you tell your industry colleagues to do differently if you could go back in time and drop some wisdom? Anybody? I'll open that to anybody who wants to chime in.
The only thing I could think of is we did spend a lot of time coming up with a multi-vendor solution. We wanted to make sure we weren't going all public cloud. We wanted to be a little conservative, so we did colo and we did managed services. And I think what we learned is those were stepping stones, but they weren't really as necessary as we thought they were. We, I think, over time quickly realized that we didn't have to do managed services. We didn't have to stay in colo for as long as we might have. I think the lesson learned there would have been to maybe just go right ahead and skip those steps and go right into the cloud.
I guess for us was like the cloud, the buzzword cloud, which is applied to anything and everything. And then yes, it's like 3 years, 4 years back, everything was cloud. It didn't matter what it was, it was cloud to do. And that created a lot of confusion into the market as to what really the cloud service means and how do we use it in an infrastructure environment. That education and that ability to understand, we're helping CIOs, CTOs understand how a managed infrastructure can work along with a public cloud was one of the things we think we have done a much better job of trying to identify the sweet spot of where each of them exists. Trying to say that you don't really need an infrastructure team. That never works, right? I mean, I don't know how many people remember 5 years back, they say you don't need an entire infrastructure team, just take it out, we'll do everything for you. Never works, but that was the selling point, the wrong selling point. They were being used.
So you feel the platform as a service aspects were really overhyped?
So I think they're becoming more acceptable now. So this is a tough one for me because I look at the journey that AWS has taken. We've been on with them for several years now. Even looking at Microsoft as well as Azure. I feel as though when naming specific public cloud vendors, Amazon really started their public cloud geared towards the startup market, and that was really their primary customer base. And we were kind of part of when they were pivoting to the enterprise, and a lot of the feature functionality that they've added since then has been to really enable the enterprise to not only onboard, to sustain. So looking back 5 years, perhaps if Amazon at that time knew how quickly and how much bigger enterprises want to get out of managing their own infrastructure, managing managed service providers and colos, and moved into a public cloud model, they would have been a little earlier to market with some of their feature functionalities. Like one of the pain points for us still happens to be around identity access management. It is a challenge in the public cloud getting that right identity access management model so you're not constraining innovation, but you still need to maintain compliance. You still need to maintain some rigor and accountability. And the other public cloud providers, they're putting a lot of noise around this. So I guess to pat them on the back, too, the one thing I found with Amazon in particular, I think Microsoft is learning it as well, is they don't lean so heavily on the marketing. It's real feature functionality that's going to be useful to you, and it's a great feedback loop. So just maintaining that feedback loop with the startup space and with the enterprise, that's probably the most important.
Just kind of following up on that note about the need for better access management tools, etc. What are some of the features that you'd like to see rolled out by cloud providers in the future? What's on your wish list? And I'll open that up to you guys. There's a lot of talk, for example, about API monitoring as a pain point, or even native configuration management.
I do like to see the cloud continue to reduce the tool set. Because a lot of the premise that we put in for moving to the public cloud was reducing the tool set to operate the data center. All of these tools that we needed to manage inside a data center. And instead, I've replaced all of those tools with tools around managing deployment and release management, and less so around managing the public cloud itself. But I know there's certainly use cases for like, for example, for you, your multi-cloud provider, you probably need an orchestration layer above that to manage being able to move between multiple cloud solutions. So, continuing to invest in the PaaS space, and because I think there's been a lot of great value add that you've added there, like ELB and CloudFormation from.
Yeah, for us it was the abstraction layer which allows us to deploy across multiple cloud providers, a huge one. Second one was being able to quickly provision private clouds. So that's quite often a challenge, trying to make sure that the service provider understands exactly what you're looking for and how should be able to create a private and a secure cloud separate from a public cloud, and being able to have that rather than me having a phone call and explain to the salesperson who in turn goes into a tech person, and before it's already about 2 or 3 days down before that conversation ever goes forward, to be able to run a script and be able to provision and test on the cloud to be really good.
I think for me, the one thing I would like to see is more standardization around the virtual images so that they can move from different cloud providers without any headache.
I actually just thought about it.
Go ahead.
Continue to press the software vendors to adopt their licensing models when we have to use licensed products for public cloud. So many of them are still based upon high watermark core counts, and they simply don't work in an auto scale present. It's not even the future. So that's been a big pain point. Some vendors have been much better about this than others. But the AWS marketplace is a great place for adopting products that are like that. But there's still mainly in the larger vendors, understand their business models are really driven around high watermark licensing. That it just simply doesn't even translate into the cloud.
Especially for Scholastic in the e-commerce space, Magento, for example, that's a big topic in the Magento community, and other major systems. Okay, so I'm gonna come in for a landing, and we'll give our audience a chance to ask questions. But just one last one for you guys, since our topic is report card. If you could give your industry a report card grade, how successfully have firms in your industry implemented cloud computing? So you give a scale of 1 to 10 or an ABC. We've got media, we've got financial services here, so I'd be interested to see how you guys think your peers are doing.
I guess for us, publishing companies are not the fastest without technology traditionally, so I think it probably would be a little lower because of that industry. In Hearst Business Media, we're active in the healthcare space, and there's a lot of risk averse there. So I think just based on the type of company we're in and the type of markets we serve, I think there's been some resistance to move very quickly into the cloud. I think that's changing now. Over the last 2 years, I think there's been a major shift there. But I would say as a result, we're still probably a 6 or 7.
For us in the financial services, it's one of the most risk-averse and regulated piece. So probably put ourselves around the 5 category. We're probably more towards the 8 within our specific space. But generally, the financial services being so regulated and the need for holding onto the data just precludes people from thinking out of this.
I agree within the publishing space, though. I think I give us a little bit more credit because for us, the transition to digital economy, digital world has really impacted us directly, perhaps more than certain other kinds of businesses, manufacturing, retail, even finance to a certain perspective. And a company like Scholastic, I'm not sure if this thing applies to you, we tend to also work with a lot of boutique firms that are doing a lot of seasonal or individual marketing campaigns, and all of the boutiques run. I mean, there's no boutiques don't have server administrators, they even have a customer administrator. They do everything in the cloud. Most of them do things in PaaS now, like Heroku and other been a great forcing function for us to be able to react to what the boutiques and development communities need in order to get their marketing campaigns out the door fast. And again, having, in this case, Amazon be that provider for us, that being able to speak that common language, we can just get so much speed to market so much faster for those particular events, and kind of drag everything else behind the more slower moving portions of our technology.
Great. Well, a lot of interesting themes have come out in this conversation, so we want to give a chance to our audience to ask some questions. So
I'll ask you guys to share the one mic, and we'll take the mic around. Any questions?
So I have two questions around security. One is, you mentioned convincing legal and compliance and other people inside. What about convincing your regulators that you can move your data out there? That's the first question. And the second question is, do you feel vulnerable that as the surface of your provider grows, that there's more attack surface, and you get reports that show how many attacks they're having, or have they not been targeted yet by any of the hackers that are targeting financial services and other companies? Both security questions.
So I could take the regulators one. So most regulators are very pessimistic about the cloud. I mean, every time you say that it's put in a third-party site, they get really antsy about it. But there is a lot of legal and what's called accreditation firms who vet out both the infrastructure, the data storage, and certify that it's compliant with whatever the legal regulation is. For us, it's PCI, MPI compliance. But so there is a lot of those kind of things which generally regulators, once they are compliant and once they get the stamp affixed on it, they don't really care. But that's the reality. Once you say that, and every year you pay the same amount of money and you get them to put the stamp on it, it's good. In terms of attacks and stuff, cloud, at least for us, we've been using a combination of CDNs and front-end the Amazon Web Services to basically divert enough of the traffic outside of our core application system that we do see an average of about once a week a big spike in basically botted traffic, but we are able to use the CDN to divert it outside of our application paths.
Yeah, I guess I wouldn't really comment too much on the regulation question, but I would comment on whether we have more attack surfaces. I think we do. In our space, in the media space, we're really transforming into a technology company. You know, the talk around our company is that we're really shifting to be a software company, and our products are more software oriented. So I think we have a lot more technology that's being exposed than we ever had before, just as a result of the way we're changing our business. I don't know that it's any more so on cloud than it would be on whether it's colo or on premise. I think it would be the same. I do think that we can respond, react a little bit quicker with incident response, and we do have issues as a result of being in the cloud.
What I meant by attack surface is that if you have 5,000 machines, you have more entry points than if you have 50. Right? So they can get into one machine and then get across the network from getting into one machine.
Yeah, I don't think we're at the 5,000 machine level yet.
No, Amazon is.
That's a good point. Good point. I'll let you guys comment on that.
So from a regulation standpoint, the regulations that I know I've been impacted by are the ones that I'm familiar with. It's much smaller for publisher and distributor, so it's mainly the PCI, with a lot of which was really removed from my domain when we adopted tokenization. There's certainly aspects of PCI that we have to concern ourselves with. SOX is being a public company, and then COPA, which is probably somewhat unique to us. Children's Online Privacy Protection Act is really about how we handle children's data. And really none of those stood out, but PCI with tokenization as unique to moving to the public cloud. COPA was really, you can roll it under the umbrella of PII, just how we handle customer data. We just have to take extra precautions if that customer is under the age of 13. In terms of surface area, like I had mentioned previously, I think for us moving to the public cloud really reduced a lot of the surface area that I have to worry about or expose, because it's the parts of it that are the domain of Amazon versus the domain of Scholastic. I know some of the exposures that I've had in the past, many of the exposures that I've had have actually been on a lot people being able to get into the internal tools or get into an admin VLAN. The other thing I found also from compliance, and it's somewhat hard to know where it was the cloud and where it was automation, the adoption of automation and the immutable infrastructure, because we did the two together. But I honestly found that adopting those two together, along with log analytics, has really presented almost a nirvana for security administrators, because what we're able to demonstrate to them is all of the work that we did around manually building systems on-prem and moving that to immutable infrastructure that we deploy into the public cloud. We literally don't need to log into servers anymore. You actually shouldn't be logging into servers. You certainly shouldn't be logging into servers and making any changes. And you can look at describing how the server is built. Focus on a server here with your Chef, CloudFormation templates, whatever you're using for automation. You use your log analytics tools, Sumo Logic, Splunk, ELK, to collect all the log analytics and make that event searchable. And then if you do still have administrators who need to log into those servers, you log all of those events as well. We're actually able to demonstrate to our compliance team that nothing happens on our infrastructure that's not transcribed in code or is not logged to the log analytics systems. Therefore, nothing should happen within the domain of Scholastic to that infrastructure that we don't have control over. So when you start to really sprawl that horizontally, 50, 500, 5,000, if they're all running the same profile, then that vulnerability is going to exist across all of them, and you can also repair that vulnerability so much faster. Again, this is more on the automation side, but we were only able to achieve that scale in the public cloud because we just couldn't invest the resources to be able to manage immutable infrastructure to that scale in a private cloud.
Hi. So I basically have two questions. My first question is, as companies move from managed architecture to cloud technology, what changes do you make to your existing teams that you had? You have your infrastructure team, your networking guys, etc. What changes do you make to that existing team? That's one question. My second question is mainly for Anil. How do you actually manage your multi-cloud architecture from an abstract level? Do you have a specific tool that you actually use to manage those, or do you manage AWS and the other vendor separately? I'll answer that and then give it to these guys. They can answer the first part better. We do it manually right now. There is no tools. We have a couple of guys who basically deploy code and manage provision. That's one of the challenges that we have internally as we're building out the DevOps team. Is one of the pieces that we're looking for is how to be able to run it across multiple clouds, have a common descriptor languages, being able to deploy it across multiple cloud stuff. So right now it's purely manual for us.
Trying to measure my words here. It is a challenging thing to answer. So I previously had a lot of administration teams reporting into me, infrastructure administrations, working in the data center, database administration, application administration. I would challenge that the administrator role has changed or is going to become non-existent or very much smaller. Certainly it is for us in the future where a lot of the rote activities that I know I used to do when I was an administrator and my teams used to do as administration, they really become engineering responsibilities. I think it becomes much more division between engineering and operations. Operations focused more on the customer experience, people like site reliability engineers, making sure that engineering or operations really is an engineering discipline. What we did is we found those people within the infrastructure and operations teams that had some knowledge of software development and were interested in adopting software development practices from an infrastructure standpoint, and we really formed a team for them to drive that objective towards driving automation. The reality is not everybody in your infrastructure team today that bears a title that ends in administrator is going to fit neatly into a role in the public cloud and automation. you see more adoption of PaaS, even the architect, even the automation engineer role shifts, because PaaS involves less automation of the deployment of compute, and instead just really taking your code, like for example, Lambda and some of the very sexy new PaaS services that Amazon comes out. It really allows the developer to bypass all of the bootstrap phase of getting the underlying JVM or whatever it is, your container that you're running your application in. The Docker is another good example. It really bypasses having to really bootstrap your system. So I think you have to take a look at your team and figure out who are the best candidates to be a little bit progressive, and it helps to really have a software development lifecycle, because they really have to understand things like engineering best practices, clean code, test-driven development, things that may be foreign to somebody who's worked primarily in an administrative role for most of their career.
Yeah, I would say very similar experiences at our company as Adam described. What we saw really is a sysadmin, which we had plenty of sysadmins. That role changed, became more of an engineer role. That was a big change.
Oh, great. Let's give some love to the back of the room. Any questions back here?
I'd like to find out what automation and provisioning tools that you're using to manage your cloud infrastructure.
Yeah, for us, we're using Chef.
Chef for us.
Chef, but I will add also that we use CloudFormation for how we describe the infrastructure in AWS. We've looked at a few other tools over the past year or so that are a little bit more agnostic, but we found that the combination of CloudFormation works very well with a lot of the popular CI tools out there, such as Jenkins and Bamboo, and then having CloudFormation really describe the infrastructure in AWS, and then it is working with EC2 Compute, really having Chef bootstrap your service. Another nice thing about Chef too is that it is also agnostic across multiple platforms, like Puppet and Salt and Ansible. You can use it. We use the very same Chef templates to boot up in AWS as we do on VMware.
Yeah, one other thing with Chef, you don't have to wait till you get to the cloud. They actually have a bare metal support, so you can use Chef and throw it off. Started with that.
All right, let's take one final question.
Are you using any tools to automate security?
Not to automate security, but certainly to implement security. I mean, we're now spending a lot of time around logging and log management, certainly monitoring, but not automation, other than maybe automating the deployment of security, but not for us at least.
Yeah, for us it's purely access control. I don't think we have any specific tools.
Mostly access control. We have a few things that we're working together right now at this time, tying together. So as a company that's been established for a long time, we do have Microsoft Active Directory, and a lot of authentication is through that. We also have external facing authentication that's mainly used for SAML authentication to jump to other applications, mostly that are SaaS-based, like ServiceNow, Workday, and others. So tying together, really orchestrating using Active Directory as the common identifier for authentication, making use of AWS, and then making use of CI tools. What I want to do is essentially reduce the amount of access I have to give to AWS directly for the areas that are not used for experimentation. For the areas that are used for experimentation, allow freeform, or lean more heavily on accountability. But in those areas of AWS that are used for experimentation, the mantra is we don't want those you don't boot systems there. You don't create production assets there. That has to go through a more rigorous pipeline to make sure that best practices are being adopted before we put a public-facing property out there that we're going to put our label and our brand on. So it's something we're actively working on right now, but I can't say we've got a very firm posture around that.
Great, I think we're going to wrap it up here. Big thanks to Tom and the panelists for your great questions.